The lamp in the back office of Novik's Automotive had a bent metal shade, dented some 30 years back by a wrench nobody remembered throwing, and it was the only light burning in the building tonight. Jerry hadn't bothered with the overheads. He hadn't planned on staying long. Now it was well past midnight, and he was still sitting in his father's old chair. The springs shot, one arm held together with black tape, and there was a spiral notebook lying flat on the desk in front of him that he hadn't opened in going on 3 years. The shop smelled the way it always smelled this time of year: cold rubber gear oil, the tang of de-icer somebody tracked in on a boot. Outside, past Route 20, the wind was coming straight off the lake and rattling the corrugated siding like it wanted in. He put 2 fingers on the cover of the notebook and didn't open it yet. The truck had shown up on a Tuesday, first week of November, and the thing Jerry remembered clearer than any word that got said that day, was the sound the front gate made when somebody worked the latch. It always stuck a little in the cold. He'd heard it stick from clear inside the bay, and some fool part of him, half a second maybe less, had thought, Dad. Thought his father was out there working that latch the way he used to before the stroke, before any of it, checking to see if the boy had left the compressor running again. Then he'd looked up through the window in the bay door, and it wasn't his father. It was a Silverado he didn't recognize, Pennsylvania plates, backing careful into a spot like the driver wasn't sure he was welcome to park at all. Jerry had set the impact wrench down on the fender of a Malibu he was mid-brake job on, and just stood there a second, hand still curled like it was holding something. The door of the truck opened. A man got out, older than Jerry remembered, obviously. 15 years does what it does, but it was the walk that gave him away before the face did. Mikey had always walked like he was bracing for somebody to yell at him, shoulders up around his ears, even as a grown man. Even now, gray coming in at his temples, a canvas coat that looked like it had been through some winters. Neither of them said anything for what felt like an ugly stretch of time. Long enough that Jerry heard the compressor kick on behind him and about jumped out of his boots. Didn't figure you'd still be here, Mikey said finally, voice rougher than Jerry remembered. The shop, I mean. Figured you'd have sold it by now. Jerry wiped his hands on a rag that didn't need wiping, just to have something to do with his hands. Why would I sell it? I don't know. Guess I don't know a lot of things. Mikey looked past him into the bay at the calendar still hanging on the wall from a parts supplier out of Erie, at the igloo cooler that used to be their father's, the same one, hadn't moved in 20 years. Place looks the same. Place ain't the same. I run it now. I know you run it. Something moved behind Mikey's eyes, quick, like a man biting down on the inside of his cheek. I heard. That's part of why I'm here, Jur. Jerry's stomach had gone tight and cold before Mikey even said the rest of it, before the words came out about Ashtabula, about the hospice up there, about a nurse who tracked down a number that hadn't been disconnected. He knew what was coming the way you know a storm's coming off the lake before the sky even does anything about it. You just feel the pressure change. He's asking for you, Mikey said, for both of us. I didn't know if. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear it from me instead of the hospital calling you direct, but I figured somebody ought to drive down and say it to your face. Jerry didn't answer that. He picked the impact wrench back up like the conversation was over, like there was a brake job that needed finishing, and for a second Mikey just stood there in the cold with his hands jammed in his coat pockets, waiting on something Jerry wasn't ready to give him yet. That's about where Jerry always stopped the memory, sitting here at the desk tonight. Right there, boots planted on the concrete, brother standing 10 feet off like a man waiting to find out if he still had a house to walk into. He set the notebook down flat again and rubbed at his eyes with the heel of his hand. He'd tell you, if you sat across from him at the counter of the Skipper Diner some slow Tuesday morning, that he keeps these notebooks the way some men keep a Bible in the truck. Not because he reads them regular, but because a man needs somewhere to put things down that he can't say out loud to another living soul. If a stranger ever asked why he still bothered writing anything down at all, working man like him, he'd probably just shrug and say it's cheaper than a bar tab and quieter than a priest. That's the whole reason there's a channel like this one at all. If you're new to it, a man puts his notebooks out into the world instead of letting them rot in a drawer. And if that's the kind of thing you go looking for some night when you can't sleep either, Stark Diaries is where these things end up. Might as well stick around for this one. It gets worse before it gets anywhere good. He should back up though, because none of that scene in the parking lot makes a lick of sense without knowing what came before it. Stanislaw Novik, everybody but Irene called him Stan, and Irene only got away with the full name when she was good and mad at him. Had built this shop up off Route 20 back in 1968. 2 bays and a hand-painted sign. After 4 years in the Navy, and 2 more scraping together credit from a bank in Ashtabula that didn't want to give a Polish kid from the East Side the time of day. He ran it the way he ran everything, which was to say like there was a war on, and slacking was how you lost it. Jerry and Mikey grew up under a hood before they grew up much of anywhere else. You didn't get a bicycle for your birthday in that house. You got a torque wrench and a lecture about how a man who can't fix his own car isn't a man worth much. Jerry took to it. That's just the plain truth of it. He liked the smell of the place. Liked that an engine either ran right or it didn't. No gray area. No guessing at what somebody meant by a look. Mikey, 4 years younger, never took to it the same way. He was quicker with people than Jerry ever was, funnier, could talk a customer into a full service they hadn't come in for, but he hated the actual grease under the nails part of it, and Stan never let him forget it. There's a particular kind of quiet a father can make a room go, just by setting a wrench down slow and looking at you, and Stan had that quiet down to an art form. Their mother, Irene, was the buffer between all of it for as long as she was able to be. She worked the front counter and kept the books better than Stan ever admitted out loud. And she had this laugh that Jerry swore you could hear clear out to the grain elevators down at the harbor when something struck her funny. She's the reason the 2 boys didn't hate each other outright growing up, probably. She built enough soft ground between them that they never had to feel the whole weight of their father pressing down at once. Then she got sick. Ovarian, they told her. The winter Jerry turned 31, Mikey 27, and it moved through her faster than anybody at Ashtabula County Medical Center wanted to admit out loud. 14 months from the first appointment to the funeral home. 14 months of Stan going quieter than anybody had ever seen him. Like the war he'd always been fighting, had finally found an enemy he couldn't outstubborn. Mikey had thrown his back out on a job that same year, hauling a transmission wrong, and a doctor over in Canute had started him on painkillers that were, by any honest telling, a little too easy to keep getting refilled. Jerry didn't see it happening in real time. None of them did, or if they did, they told themselves it was grief. It was the back. It was temporary. It's easy, looking back with a lamp on and a notebook open, to see all the places somebody could have said something. It's a lot harder to see them living through it, one ordinary Tuesday at a time. What Jerry knows for a fact, because he was the one who found it, was that money started disappearing out of the register in amounts small enough to explain away individually and large enough, added up over about 5 months, to matter. He knows because he was the one who finally sat down with the bank statements from their mother's personal account, the one she'd kept separate her whole marriage, cigar box money she called it, though she'd quit smoking before either boy was born, and found 4 checks written out to cash in the last 6 weeks of her life, in a hand that was trying hard to look like hers and mostly succeeding, to anybody who wasn't her other son. He never told Stan the exact number. He's still not sure, all these years on, whether that was mercy or cowardice. What he does remember with no fog on it at all is the funeral. A gray Thursday in April, ground still half frozen, so the backhoe operator complained about it before the service even started, and Mikey nowhere in the pews, nowhere in the fellowship hall after. Nowhere on the phone when Jerry called it 11 times between the church and the burial. He showed up 2 days later at the shop, hollowed out, shaking some, said he was sorry, said he'd been sick. And Stan had looked at him from across the same desk Jerry was sitting at right now and told him, in about 9 words total, that he didn't have 2 sons anymore. He had 1. Mikey left that same week, didn't say where. For about the first year there had been a birthday card, no return address, postmarked out of Pennsylvania somewhere, and then even that stopped. 15 years is a long time to let a silence set. Long enough it stops feeling like silence and starts feeling like the actual shape of the family, like it was always going to end up this way. 2 brothers and a father who never once, in all that time, said the other one's name out loud that Jerry ever heard, until a stroke took half of Stan's speech 3 winters back. And even then, in the therapy sessions, in the slurred half sentences he'd relearn one at a time, he never once tried to say Michael. Jerry ran the shop alone after that. Hired a part-time kid, Dwayne, decent enough with brakes but useless on anything electrical, and mostly just kept the doors open and kept driving up to Ashtabula every Sunday to sit with his father in a recliner that smelled like the inside of a hospital, even in the man's own living room, watching whatever game was on, saying less and less, because there was less and less either of them seemed to think was worth saying. So when Mikey's truck pulled into that gravel lot on a Tuesday in November, Jerry wasn't just looking at a brother he hadn't seen in 15 years. He was looking at every check with a forged signature, every empty pew, every Sunday he'd driven up that hill alone while somebody else's son got to walk away clean. He was looking at the exact shape of the thing that had cost him his mother's last months of peace and his father's second son, standing there in a canvas coat, asking to be let back into whatever was left. He remembers setting the wrench down again, slower this time. He remembers Mikey's jaw working like he was chewing on something he hadn't decided whether to say. "I've been sober 3 years," Mikey said into all that quiet. "Come this January, it's 3 years. I know that doesn't buy back anything, Jur. I ain't here for that." "Then what are you here for?" Mikey looked at him then, straight on, the first time either of them had managed it since the truck door opened. "I'm here because he's dying, and I don't have it in me to let him go without seeing his face one more time, whether he wants to see mine or not. And because you're the only person left alive who'd even know how to reach me if I didn't come find you first." He didn't answer that right away. He remembers standing there with the compressor clicking on and off behind him, cold coming up through the concrete into his boots, and thinking about every version of this moment he'd built up in his head over 15 years. The ones where he told Mikey to get back in the truck and not come around again. The ones where he swung on him. The ones, worse than either, where he just stood there frozen like he was doing right now. What he finally said was, "You drive straight through." Since Altoona, Mikey's shoulders came down maybe half an inch, like that question had been a door left open a crack. "I can be back on the road tonight if you want me gone. I just needed you to hear it from me." "Get in the truck," Jerry said. "I'll follow you up to Ashtabula. I ain't doing this parking lot standing up." They didn't say much on the drive. 20 minutes up Route 20 with the lake somewhere off to the left, black and enormous in the dark. And Jerry kept the radio off the whole way because he didn't trust his own hands not to shake if he had to reach over and touch a dial. The hospice smelled like every hospice does, the flowers people bring because they don't know what else to bring, and under that, something clinical trying to cover for something else. A nurse named Patris met them at the desk and said Stan had good days and bad days, and today had been somewhere in between, and that his speech came and went, mostly went, 3 years since the stroke had taken most of it clean out of him. Jerry made Mikey wait in the hall a minute, not out of spite, or not only out of spite. He needed 30 seconds alone in that room first, needed to say what he had to say without an audience. He drove up, Jerry told his father, sitting on the edge of the bed taking the hand that still worked. "Mikey, he's out in the hall. I can send him home if you want. You just tell me and I'll do it." Stan's eyes were open, tracking him the way they always did now, slower than they used to but still all the way there behind them. His mouth worked. What came out wasn't a full word, hadn't been a full word in 3 years, more of a sound with an idea buried somewhere inside it, and Jerry had gotten good these last 3 years at reading the shape of a thing his father couldn't finish saying. This one he couldn't read. Stan's hand tightened around his, not letting go, and his eyes went to the door like he already knew who was standing behind it. Jerry went and got his brother. What happened after that isn't the kind of thing that fits neat into a scene, the way you'd want it to if you were telling somebody else's story instead of your own. Mikey stood at the foot of the bed for a long minute, not moving, and Jerry watched something go through his brother's face that he hadn't seen since they were kids. Since maybe the day their mother told them, calm as anything, that the tests hadn't come back the way anybody hoped. "Hey, Pop," Mikey said, and his voice cracked clean in half on the second word. Stan's hand came up off the blanket, not far, maybe 4 inches. But it came up, and it reached, and Mikey crossed the last few feet of that room like the floor was moving under him, and took his father's hand in both of his. Jerry stood off by the window with his arms crossed, watching, and he'll tell you now, notebook open, lamp burning, that he spent a good long while in that moment hating both of them a little. Hating his father for reaching for the son who'd forged 4 checks off a dying woman's account, and hating his brother for still, after everything, being the one who got reached for first. It wasn't fair. He knows it wasn't fair to feel that. Knows his father was a dying man doing the one thing dying men do, which is try to put right whatever they can reach in the time they've got left. But knowing a feeling isn't fair doesn't make it go anywhere. It just sits there in you, ugly, while your face does something else entirely. What Stan managed, working his mouth around it for the better part of a minute while nobody in that room breathed too loud, was one syllable. Not the whole name, just the front half of it, worn down by 3 years of a mouth that didn't work right anymore. But there was no mistaking which son it was aimed at, because his eyes never left Mikey's face while he did it. Mikey put his forehead down against their father's hand and didn't say anything at all for a while. Jerry stepped out into the hall. He needed a minute that wasn't his to give away, and there's no shame he'll admit to now in taking it. They didn't fix 15 years that night. He wants to be straight about that, because it'd be a lie to tell you different, and lies aren't why a man sits down with a notebook at midnight. Mikey stayed in town at a motel off the interstate for the better part of 2 weeks while their father held on, longer than the nurses expected. And there were nights the 2 brothers sat in that hospital room together and barely traded 10 words between them. And there was one night, the worst of it, when Jerry finally said the thing about the checks out loud for the first time in 15 years. Said the number. Said how he'd never told their father the truth of it. Said he didn't know if that had been mercy, or just him being too much of a coward to watch his father lose a second son on purpose, instead of by accident. Mikey didn't argue any of it, didn't try to make it smaller than it was, just sat there and took it, the way you take something you know you've got coming, and said he'd pay every dollar of it back if it took him the rest of his life. And Jerry told him that wasn't the point, and the point was never really about the money at all. Stan passed on a Sunday, quiet, both his sons in the room, the recliner from the living room somehow having found its way into the corner of a hospice room, because Irene's spot on it had gone unsat in for 3 years, and nobody could bring themselves to get rid of it either. Mikey's still around. Not living in town, not yet, maybe not ever, but he calls now. And he came back through in the spring and put in 2 weeks helping Dwayne catch up on a backlog of break jobs. And it was the first time in 15 years Jerry heard that particular sound again. His brother laughing at something dumb a customer said, out in the bay, easy, like no time at all had gone by. It didn't fix anything either, but it was something. Some nights that's the whole of what a man gets, and Jerry's trying to learn how to call that enough. He closed the notebook then, out at the desk, lamp still burning, wind still working at the siding. Didn't put it back in the drawer. Left it sitting right there on top, like maybe there was more to it he hadn't gotten to yet. If you've got a brother or a father you haven't spoken two honest words to in longer than you'd like to admit, I'd ask you this straight out. What are you waiting on that you can't get back once it's gone? Put it in the comments if you've got the nerve to. This is Stark Diaries, and there's more where this one came from.